Also today, after a short delay, Oklahoma death row inmate Phillip Hancock was executed this morning. His execution somewhat controversial because the Pardon and Parole Board recommended clemency for him, which the governor denied in the 11th hour. Hancock was sentenced to death for the 2001 killings of Robert Jett Jr. and James Lynch in Jett's Oklahoma City home. News 4's Caitlin Ogle is in McAllister and has the breaking news update.
3 murders in nearly 20 years, all claimed as self-defense. And his final words will make you understand why he never admitted guilt. From 1982 to 2001, Phillip Dean Hancock took the lives of 3 men each time, insisting he was only protecting himself. Today, November 30th, 2023, after 19 years on death row at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, Phillip Dean Hancock will be executed by lethal injection. From the child who protected his disabled brother to a serial killer, his last meal was just KFC fried chicken. His last words were filled with hatred for those who brought him to justice, and he took to his grave the secret of his true motives behind each murder. This content contains elements of violence and true crime. Viewer discretion is advised. Phillip Dean Hancock, a name linked to 3 shocking murders in Oklahoma over 41 years. The first case in 1982 landed him just 3 years in prison for first-degree manslaughter. The second case in 2001 was a double murder that led to a death sentence. The noteworthy detail is that in all 3 cases, Hancock insisted he was only acting in self-defense. Do you believe him? Comment below. Charles Lester Warren was born on June 20, 1954, and grew up in a normal family in Oklahoma City. In 1982, at the age of 27, Warren was living the life of a small-time drug dealer in a local park. At the same time, Phillip Dean Hancock was just 18 years old, having entered adulthood with a past of caring for his disabled brother and witnessing domestic violence. 2 different life paths were set to cross on the fateful day of May 26, 1982. 19 years later, there was Robert Lee Jett Jr., born February 12, 1963, a 38-year-old man with a history of supplying drugs. His friend, James Vincent Lynch III, born in 1943, was 58 years old and a regular visitor at Jett's house, where they would use drugs together. Meanwhile, Hancock, now 37, a man who had already killed and served time, was dating a woman who had a drug-dealing relationship with Jett. But there was one detail about Robert Jett that even his family didn't know. He had warned friends that a man named Hancock was acting threatening and violent, but no one took his warning seriously. Phillip Dean Hancock was born on February 15, 1964, the elder of 2 sons in Oklahoma City. His childhood was marked by the heavy responsibility of caring for his younger brother, who suffered from cerebral palsy due to a birth complication. He frequently fought with older boys to protect his brother from bullying. The Hancock family was Methodist, but from a young age he exhibited unusual behavior, often sneaking off to salvage yards to smoke marijuana and cigarettes with other children. More importantly, Hancock's father was abusive towards his wife and children, to the point where his mother had to run away from home to escape the domestic violence. According to criminal psychology experts, children who grow up in violent homes and bear excessive responsibility often develop an overactive defense mechanism. They may develop a disregard for the law and easily resort to violence to resolve conflicts. When analyzing Hancock's timeline, we see a clear pattern from a child protecting his brother with his fists, to an 18-year-old protecting himself with a gun, and then to a 37-year-old man defending himself by killing 2 people. This is a typical escalation pattern. Each use of violence is more severe than the last. There are 5 warning signs everyone should know about individuals with violent potential. First, a history of domestic violence. Second, early drug use. Third, an attitude of justifying violence, such as self-defense. Fourth, a lack of empathy for victims. And fifth, an escalation pattern in the severity of violence. On May 26, 1982, Charles Warren was conducting his usual business in the park when he encountered an 18-year-old named Phillip Hancock. Apparently, there was an issue over a ring that had gone missing from Warren's house, and Warren felt Hancock might be involved. He decided to confront him directly, using his physical size to intimidate the young man into confessing. In Warren's mind, this was just a normal way of settling disputes in their world. For Hancock, he saw himself being threatened by an older, larger man with a reputation in the criminal underworld. When Warren slapped him and threatened to drag him out of his car and beat him up, Hancock felt his life was in danger. He saw his friend Kenneth Ray Halsey's .22 caliber rifle and decided to defend himself. For Patrick Michael O'Brien, the 16-year-old at the scene, he saw Hancock being beaten by Warren and heard Hancock say he wanted to shoot Warren. O'Brien tried to talk Hancock out of this dangerous idea, but failed. He became a witness to a murder that might have been prevented. For Warren's family, they lost a son and a brother who, despite his poor life choices, did not deserve to die. They couldn't understand how a minor conflict could lead to such a tragic outcome. 19 years later, on the night of April 27, 2001, the tragedy repeated on a larger scale. This time, there were three main perspectives. Robert Jett Jr. and James Vincent Lynch III were using drugs together in Jett's house, feeling it was a normal evening like any other. When Hancock arrived, they never expected that an argument over a pack of cigarettes would lead to both of their deaths. From Sean Smokey Tarp's perspective, she witnessed the entire incident, from Jett pulling out a gun to Hancock wrestling it away and killing both men. Most terrifyingly, she saw Hancock chase the injured Jett into the backyard, and when Jett said, "I'm going to die," Hancock coldly replied, "You're going to die," and finished him off. The investigation of the 1982 case was relatively simple because Hancock surrendered shortly after the crime. Police collected statements from witnesses at the scene, including Patrick O'Brien and others in the park. They also recovered Kenneth Ray Halsey's .22 caliber rifle, the murder weapon. Investigators determined the conflict arose from Warren's suspicion that Hancock was involved in the theft of his ring. However, the 2001 case was much more complex. Forensic technology had advanced significantly since 1982. Police used fingerprint analysis, DNA, and ballistics to investigate. They collected evidence from the scene, including the victim's blood shell casings and other traces. Every piece of evidence indicated this was not a simple case of self-defense, as Hancock claimed. Specifically, the trajectory analysis of the gunshots showed that the victims were shot while trying to flee, not in an attacking posture. But what the investigators didn't know was that Hancock already had experience getting away with it from the 1982 case by using the self-defense plea. He had learned how to construct a story to justify his violent actions, and this would become a recurring pattern throughout his criminal life. After the double murder in 2001, Hancock became one of Oklahoma's most wanted fugitives. He had systematically planned his escape from the scene. First, he left Jett's house immediately after the shooting, knowing the gunshots would soon attract police. He used his knowledge of the city's layout to move through less-traveled routes. During his year on the run, Hancock lived the life of an anonymous man. He changed his appearance, avoided familiar areas, and survived on odd jobs that didn't require identification. During this time, he may have moved between several states, from Oklahoma to Texas, Arkansas, and possibly Kansas. A life on the run made him extremely vigilant and paranoid. The law enforcement cooperation in capturing Hancock was mainly at the federal level. The FBI joined the investigation and entered Hancock's information into the national database. However, as it was a domestic case, there was no involvement from international law enforcement agencies. There were 3 times Hancock was nearly caught. The first time when he visited an old friend in Oklahoma City, but luckily left the location before police arrived. The second when he was stopped by traffic police, but his fake ID passed inspection. And the third when he applied for a job at a factory in Texas, but fled when he suspected he was being discovered. Ultimately, Hancock was not arrested as a result of the murder investigation, but for other crimes. On March 26, 2002, he was arrested on firearm and drug-related charges and incarcerated at the Great Plains Correctional Institution in Hinton. It was during this time that forensic evidence linked him to the 2001 double murder. Hancock's trial for the double murder took place in a tense atmosphere with significant public attention. Hancock once again used the self-defense tactic, the same reason that helped him escape a harsher sentence in the 1982 case. His defense attorney focused on portraying him as an ordinary man threatened by dangerous criminals. In the American legal system, self-defense is one of the most powerful defenses. To prove self-defense, the defendant must prove three elements. First, they faced an imminent threat. Second, they believed the use of force was necessary to protect themselves. And third, the level of force used was proportional to the threat. The defense attorney's strategy was to convince the jury that Hancock met all three criteria. However, the prosecutor had a strong counter-strategy. They focused on proving that Hancock's actions after subduing the two victims were inconsistent with someone acting in self-defense. The act of chasing the injured Jet into the backyard and saying, "You're going to die," before finishing him off, showed this was an act of revenge, not self-defense. The prosecutor also pointed out Hancock's history of using violence and justifying it with self-defense, suggesting it was a behavioral pattern. The jury rejected Hancock's self-defense argument. They found that the forensic evidence and witness testimony did not support his story. In particular, the fact that Hancock fled after the incident instead of calling the police also reduced the credibility of his self-defense claim. As a result, Hancock was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Throughout the lengthy legal process, Hancock wrote numerous letters and made continuous statements proclaiming his innocence and that he was only acting in self-defense. These letters were written from his cell during his 19 years on death row. The content of the letters shows that Hancock consistently maintained his self-defense story without changing any significant details. When applying forensic linguistics, the science of analyzing language to assess truthfulness, experts noted some remarkable features in how Hancock described the events. He often used a passive voice when talking about killing the victims, such as "they died," instead of "I killed them." This could indicate he was trying to create psychological distance from his actions. Additionally, he was very detailed when describing the threat from the victims, but vague when explaining why he needed to kill both of them. When comparing the timeline in Hancock's testimony with the forensic evidence, there were many inconsistencies. For instance, he claimed that Jet drew the gun and threatened him first, but fingerprints on the gun showed Hancock had held it. He also couldn't explain why it was necessary to chase down and kill Jet when the victim was already wounded and no longer a threat. Do you believe Hancock was telling the truth about self-defense? Based on the evidence and analysis we've reviewed, what is your confidence level? The results will be announced in the next video, along with a psychologist's analysis of the behavioral patterns of serial killers who tend to justify their actions. On November 29, 2023, 24 hours before his execution, Phillip Dean Hancock spent the final moments of his life in his death row cell at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. According to guards' records, he appeared relatively calm, showing no signs of panic or despair. He made a final phone call to his lawyer to discuss last-minute efforts. For clemency, wrote some final letters to relatives, and met with Devin Moss, an atheist chaplain who had been with him for over a year. Hancock's mood was described as resigned, accepting his fate, but still resentful of the court's decision. The last meal Hancock requested was quite simple and somewhat symbolic. He wanted a bucket of dark meat fried chicken from KFC, only the dark meat with no side dishes, and a bottle of root beer. The meal was served at 4 p.m. on November 30th, about 7 hours before the execution. Hancock ate all the chicken, but drank only a little of the root beer. This choice suggests he wanted a familiar comfort food from his childhood, perhaps, as a way to find a sense of normalcy in his final hours. In the execution chamber, witnesses included the victims' families, media representatives, and others connected to the case. Hancock used his last words to express gratitude to his lawyers, to continue insisting that the double murder was an act of self-defense, and to express hope that he would be exonerated after his death. Most notably, he spent most of his final moments launching a scathing attack on the prosecution team under Attorney General Gentner Drummond with hateful words. "They're vile. They're virtueless. They're without honor." These final words demonstrated that until the very end, Hancock did not accept responsibility for his actions, but instead blamed the justice system. The fact that he used his last moments to attack the prosecutor rather than apologize to the victims' families showed a lack of empathy and remorse, typical traits of a sociopath. The lethal injection process was clinical and solemn. Hancock was pronounced dead at 11:29 a.m. With Hancock's death, the three victims' families finally had closure for tragedies that had spanned over 40 years. After Philip Dean Hancock's death, the victims' families had varied reactions. The family of Robert Jett Jr. felt that justice had been served after 22 years of waiting. Ryan Jett Roberts' brother stated that although his brother was no angel, he didn't deserve to die in the backyard like a dog. Meanwhile, James Lynch's family also felt a sense of relief that the killer had finally paid for his crimes. The Hancock case led to significant changes in how Oklahoma handles cases involving self-defense claims. Prosecutors are now trained more thoroughly on how to analyze the behavioral patterns of criminals who tend to use self-defense to justify violence. The system has also enhanced the cross-referencing of criminal records when assessing the credibility of a defendant's claims. However, there are still unanswered questions surrounding Hancock's criminal life. In the 19 years between his first and last cases, did he truly not commit any other crimes? Some investigators believe there may be other cases in which Hancock was involved but was never discovered. Specifically in 2001, before killing Jett and Lynch, Hancock had a missing period of about 6 months where no one knew his whereabouts or activities. If you have information about any case that might be related to Philip Dean Hancock between 1985 and 2001, especially cases where the suspect used a self-defense plea, please contact the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation. Although Hancock is dead, solving these cold cases could still bring peace to other families. The life and death of Philip Dean Hancock leave many important lessons about recognizing early warning signs of violence, the importance of promptly reporting threatening behavior, and the need for a justice system that can distinguish between genuine self-defense and the abuse of this plea to justify violence. Devin Moss, the atheist chaplain who accompanied Hancock in his final months, later shared that, until the very end, Hancock could not accept responsibility for what he had done, a testament to the fact that some criminals will never feel true remorse. The case of Philip Dean Hancock is closed, but the questions about nature versus nurture, about whether a violent environment can create killers, and about the thin line between self-defense and murder continue to spark debates among criminologists. The deaths of 3 men, Charles Warren, Robert Jett Jr., and James Lynch III, left wounds that will never heal for their loved ones, but they also became a part of Oklahoma's judicial history, reminding us that justice, sometimes delayed, will eventually be served. This is the story of Philip Dean Hancock, from a child protecting his brother to a serial killer, from his first successful self-defense plea to his final confrontation with the ultimate consequence. A story about the escalation of violence, the abuse of the legal system, and the price paid when justice is finally done. In his final hateful words and his refusal to accept responsibility, we see the true portrait of a man who never truly repented for what he had done.